my concern, Chamath, is that we've rushed into a reactive response with respect to sanctions and seizing assets in a way that maybe not be calculated over the long run. Meaning, like, are we setting ourselves up for another Iraq, Afghanistan situation where we rush into a war and we don't have an exit strategy? And the issue is that a lot of the assets that we've effectively wiped the value down to zero have a repercussive effect on global businesses and the global economy. As an example, this company that we were texting about called Lukoil, they were worth $60 billion a few days ago. We effectively wiped them out to zero. And 65 to 70% of the shares in that company were held and owned by public retirement funds, pension funds, mutual funds that are used for retirees in Europe and the United States. And so, a significant amount. This
is a complete red herring. I've told you this in the private chat. I think this is a complete red herring. And the reason it's a red herring is that the global total market cap of all of these businesses is meaningfully different than the amount of total capex that these guys represent. And in as much as you are going to take the equity values of certain of these companies to zero, it's in the grand scheme of things not that much equity value.
We can absorb it.
We're not talking trillions of dollars.
Forget about the equity value. Just think about the economic repercussions where there is leveraged positions and swaps and derivatives in place, counterparty swaps in place with a lot of these companies that are now going to default. And we're not going to know that till the end of this month when everything has to settle and no one's going to be able to make their payments.
Small price to pay, Friedberg.
Well, hold on one sec. This applies both to Russian companies that are suppliers and buyers of assets, products, and services from international businesses. And all of a sudden, that line item just zeroes out.
I don't believe the economic value of all of that oil exceeds the market cap of Lukoil. I don't believe it. And I don't believe further that the economic value that's held by non-Russian actors is meaningfully more than a few tens of billions of dollars.
We're going to find out pretty quick.
For sanctions.
By the way, Russia and the Ukraine combined account for roughly 25% of global wheat exports.
Let me say it differently.
That wheat goes to Egypt, and from Egypt, it goes throughout Africa. And there's a lot of nations and a lot of people that depend on that food supply. And that food supply is now cut off.
Okay, I understand. But now we were talking about something different. You want to talk about wheat? We can talk about wheat.
I'm just talking about generally, I'm talking about zeroing all this stuff out and cutting them off completely.
Hold on a second. One of the things you have to realize, Friedberg, is that the purpose of sanctions is to create massive pain that stops a madman dictator
100% agreed.
from invading other countries and causing a world war. So while it is tragic that some pension... Hold on, let me finish, Friedberg. While it is tragic that people will suffer and people maybe can't get their Netflix or can't get their Facebook or some wheat will get disrupted, all of this is the better choice than going to war with Putin. And it's meant to create pain and suffering. It does not create pain and suffering, then Russia will not change.
I understand the intent.
That's the point of sanctions.
J.K., I totally get it. I totally understand the intent, and I totally understand the point. My point is, have we really done the calculus? Because when you make this much of an impact this fast, when you rush into what we might call an economic war with such significant abrasion in such a significantly short period of time, do we really have a sense of where the calculus is? Because I don't know where the wheat imports are going to come from for Egypt now. And I don't know where the millions of people that depend on that wheat supply are now going to get fed from. And I don't think we have an answer. If we had a strategy that said, here's the solution from an energy perspective, from a food perspective, from a capital perspective, to fill all these holes. Otherwise, we may all end up sharing that cost over the long run. And it's going to be a big cost to bear.
I think you're wrong. And the reason why I think you're wrong is we've already seen how this has played out before. So in the last 2 years, we learned what governments are willing to do when you have supply shocks and demand shocks. And what they do is they turn on the money printer and they create enormous amounts of stimulus. Okay? And what we have now is a point where if these shocks are really, really, really meaningful globally, I think you're going to see the Federal Reserve and the ECB and the Bank of Canada and the Bank of Japan step in a very coordinated way to provide liquidity to these markets. And I think what that has the byproduct of doing is blunting the economic consequences to everybody but the person who is sanctioned.
Do you think that's inflationary as well?
No. And the other thing, in fact, it's the opposite. Look, David and I have been the ones that said the risk is to a recession. We are now teetering towards a recession. Nick, you should throw this thing that I sent to you guys before. If you look back over the last 30 or 40 or 50 years and you look at every single period of when there has been a recession, what's interesting to note is that it's not always been the case that the price of energy has risen by 50% in a recession. But it is always the case that when energy prices spike by 50%, we enter a recession. We will contract as an economy. The government will have to become more accommodating. That is the price of this economic war that we have started. And I think it's a just price because what's happening is not supportable.
So, Chamath, you are sure that you feel strongly that we're not entering into a condition of significant stagflation where we're not able to re-stimulate the economy and we inflate everything with all this money printing?
I don't even know what stagflation is, to be completely honest with you. I don't think I've ever seen it. I know how it's classically described. I think it's like pseudo-intellectual kind of gobbledygook speak. What I can tell you is I think that prices are too high in certain core commodities and goods. I think what's going to happen is we are going to find a way to subsidize those prices coming down. And I think the simplest way to do it is for the government to step in and become a buffer. And it will drive massive deficits. It'll drive increasing amounts of debt. But I think that is a simple way for us to make sure we put and ratchet the pressure. And just to speak on this other point, we have only just begun. Meaning just today, as we started the pod, Biden came out with an incremental new set of sanctions on Russian crude. So we're not even in the beginning. We're at the beginning of the beginning.
I'm just worried this is a new kind of nuclear war. I mean, it's frightening.